Bonsoir, rebonsoir tout le monde. Donc, nous sommes ravis d'avoir Hartmut Rosa ce soir. Évidemment, nous sommes très honorés. Je vais juste présenter rapidement en français les personnes qui sont ici. Donc, vous connaissez déjà Hartmut Rosa. Vous commencez éventuellement à connaître Hartmut Rosa. Alors, je vais commencer avec Christine. Christine Détré est sociologue ici et aussi autrice. Je vous invite à lire ses livres, évidemment, avec un angle peut-être dans le genre et la culture, j'ai envie de dire. Et, bon, on va cuisiner les émotions avec Christine. Lukas Pairon, qui nous vient de Belgique, qui est le fondateur de l'ensemble musical contemporain Ictus, et qui est un philosophe qui travaille à Kinshasa en ce moment sur le lien entre sociologie et musique. Je le dis trop rapidement. Hein. Mais voilà, Lucas. Et donc on va démarrer. Alors je vais tout de suite donner le micro. I'll give the mic to Hartmut, who wants to say a few words before I ask my first question, and then we'll circulate.
Oui, merci beaucoup. D'abord tout, bien sûr, je voudrais remercier l'ENS et vous tous pour cet honneur. C'est vraiment un grand honneur pour moi. Malheureusement, mon français n'est pas assez bien. I'll switch to English. I'm sorry for this. It's too important, really. I would really like to thank the president and also for the nice word, and of course for this great honor to me, and Olivier Hamant for the speech, and Lucas for bringing us together, and you too for joining us for the discussion. I mean, of course, one would say thank you very much. It means a lot to me, but it really does, right? I mean, I must say when I wrote my book on acceleration, I had no idea it was a qualification in Germany, what we call the Habilitation, the second doctorate. I had no idea what would come from this. And France really was the first country who really received and read my works. I was totally surprised. I remember that one day Nancy Fraser, whom the social scientists might know, said, "Oh, Hartmut, did you know that your book is all over France?" And I had no idea, really. I was totally surprised. I think it was because Le Monde had put it on the title, and or on the title of the magazine, and ever since that, France was special for me. It's really true. You know, this small book, which some of you might know, Alienation and Acceleration. I mean, I had written it for a small Swedish publisher, and it was in French before it was in Germany, right? It only got to it's actually true. I had written it in English, but no one read it in English, right? But then the French discovered it, and you really read it, right? And you discussed it, and then the German publisher wanted to have it too. So, but what is also true is that Lyon was the first city I visited out of Germany. I came to Lyon, to INSA, I think, here, and I've been 2 or 3 times back in Lyon, and it really and it still means a lot to me. I really believe, I mean, we are in this world together, right, where you founded the school and your institute, right, for a durable world. I mean, we have to build it across countries. We have to build the bridges there, but also across disciplines. It's so obvious to me, right? No discipline can do it by themselves, even between the sciences and the humanities, but also the politics and society writ large. So we have to do it across disciplines. We have to do it across countries, but also across generations. The younger and the older have to be. We are in this together. So let's try to find a way out. And I find that the ENS here in Lyon is a good place to start. So I really paid attention to what the president said, right? That we should, that I'm invited, right, to come back to your institute, and I surely would like to do this and love to do it. And so I hope this is not the end of an interesting journey, but the beginning of it. So thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, Hartmut. So I have maybe the first question, and then I'll pass on the mic. But maybe the first question would be, it's a tricky question so that you can tell us a little bit about the concepts. But I guess a question that you often have is, what made you go in that direction? What's the trajectory? And just to make it a little bit tricky, that trajectory towards resonance, acceleration, all these questions, I'll start with, one point. Do you have in your memory, let's say, I don't know, your bedroom when you were a child or something that you can connect to this question of critique of modernity or acceleration, alienation, all this.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned my bedroom because it does play a role in this. I have to say, I would really say it's really true. I mean, what I try to do, I call it a sociology of of self-world, relationships, Weltbeziehungen, of notre relation être au monde, in the world and to the world, which is inspired by Maurice Merleau-Ponty, of course. But it really was this acceleration. I think it really started when, as an undergraduate student, I grew up in the mountains of the La Forêt Noire, the Black Forest, right in the corner of France and Switzerland. And I remember when I started to study in Freiburg. Freiburg was too big for me, I always thought. Right? I thought, how can people live in such a big city? But Freiburg is tiny, right? And then, even as an undergraduate student, my teacher sent me away and said, you cannot always stay in the Black Forest, you have to go to see the wide world. And I was sent to London, to the London School of Economics, and was totally overwhelmed by the difference. And when I came back to the Black Forest, I thought, well, somehow I'm a different person when I walk through my village than when I walk through the streets of London. And it has to do with my sense of temporality. Life seems to be, there's a different, it's not just that London is fast and the Black Forest is slow. It's a different form of being in time and to time. I mean, by the way, it's a quite funny side story that Heidegger, who has written Being in Time, was actually having his famous cabin just 20 kilometers from where I live, right? But it wasn't Heidegger who got me anything there. I had this sense there is a different way of being in time, and that made me think about London is fast and what is this? And for me, like for Georg Simmel, the metropolis, this kind of life I experienced there, was standing for modernity and it was standing for speed. So I think that was the beginning. And then, then I had written the speed book, right? And I thought, well, this is really at the heart of modernity, changing time, but also changing our way of being in the world. But then something strange happened, namely that the media in France, but more so in Germany, they called me the guru of deceleration, the prophet of slowness, and this kind of stuff, right? And I thought, that's really strange. I have not written about slowness or deceleration nowhere, right? So I came up with this concept of alienation. I thought speed is not always bad. It's bad when it leads to alienation, right? And I had written, I think at the end of the acceleration book, I said, for me, it's only a first step in a sociology of the good life. What makes life a good life and what makes it a bad life, right? And this is where I really, at the end of the day, very often I would stand in my bedroom and watch the world, look out to the world, and ask myself, is it a good day or a bad day? And what's the difference? And I realized that when I felt it's a good day, I felt like connected with the fibers or vibrant strings to the world, right? I would see the forest and think, oh yes, the forest, the mushrooms are growing, whatever. I like the smell of the forest and so on. But also with the sky, I like to watch the stars. It will be a clear sky tonight or something like this sort. I would see my neighbors and think, oh, next week they're celebrating birthday or so. It was this sense of being connected with vibrating fibers or strings. And when I was in a bad mood, I thought, well, I see my neighbors, but I hate them. or they hate me or whatever, right? And the forest is dying, by the way. At that time, we had a very bad crisis with the forest. So I thought, okay, the way I relate to nature, to people, even to myself is different, right? And this is out of this kind of contemplation. I thought, okay, what's the difference now? And what's the reason for the difference? Is how I developed the idea of alienation is when there is no connection, no vibrant connection to life. And resonance is when you feel this form of connection, it touches me and it transforms me. So yes, the bedroom did play an important role there.
All right, you know all that, that's great. Thank you. So maybe I'll pass the mic directly to Christine. So, yeah.
Thank you, Olivier. Thank you, Hartmut, to be there and to give us the honor to speak with you. Olivier said I'm sociologist and I work on gender, culture, and more recently emotions. And when Olivier finished your speech, you used 3 words: acceleration, alienation, and you said emotion. So I will have some question about emotion. So in sociology, in France, we have like in other countries, what we call emotional turn, with this idea that our emotions, our feelings are intertwined with historical and social context. Yes, and I would like to know how acceleration and how competition frame our emotions. You know, in your book, I don't remember if it's in Resonance or in Acceleration and Alienation, you speak about guilt, the feeling of guilt and the feeling of fear. So could you explain us how competition and acceleration frame our very contemporary emotions?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I think actually there is a lot more work to be done than what I have done. So I'm glad you're working on this, right? Because emotion, I mean, I do have in the resonance book, I introduce kind of affection and emotion as this kind of interplay, right? Between the world is coming towards me and the world is coming towards me always has a kind of emotional tone, right? It's not just a stream of information I get. Every information or what I perceive to be information carries a significance. It's an idea I get from Charles Taylor, right? So it touches me in a certain sense, and then I react to it. I'm moving in. So the world is moving in, and I'm moving outward, and the emotions, you could say, are always a kind of in between. And with this acceleration, you know, I'm now working. I'm working also on the sense of on a concept. It's really strange because you know you're a physicist, right? And I did not do it on purpose. For me, I always work with physical terms. Maybe actually when I finished high school, I wanted to study philosophy and physics, and then teachers told me you cannot do it both, right? So yeah, so I said, okay, then I go for the humanities, right? But the new concept I'm working on is energy, which of course is again a kind of physics, at least you can use it in physics too, right? And I really think, because that's your question, something is wrong with our, you could say, energetic exchange with the world. And something that troubles me a lot is the so-called burnout crisis, particularly with young people, right? Because we know, I mean, the mental health of young people is really, it's a huge problem all over the world. I mean, it's huge in Asia, in China, in Japan, in Korea, but also in Latin America, and I was invited to Brazil for exactly this reason, and in Europe. I mean, the data is horrible, and I think what is lacking with young people, and it's certainly not their fault, is this dual thing: lust for life. I mean, lust sounds a bit, you know, sinful, but I don't mean it in that sense. This kind of having the desire, the joy of getting enmeshed, getting in contact with life. What you see with young people, if they're healthy, I would say, right? The beaming eyes. Yes, I want to be in contact with it, but it's also trust in life. So I always say it's lust for life and trust in life. This is what our society is losing. It's like a distortion in our emotional way of being in the world, in this dual sense, right? What the attraction which moves me in the world, and but also the trust, the sense of self-efficacy. And I've just finished this short book, which will it's a medium-sized book, which will be out in German in January, but rather soon, I'm sure, also in French, where I try to say that there is the connection between emotion and action in many cases is cut, right? We don't act on our emotions, right? Normally you fulfill programs, right? You work on your to-do lists, but even, you know, if you cook with a thermomix, as we call it, right? Yeah. Then you might. I think. I mean, for me, it was kind of eye-opening for myself, right? That normally acting means kind of reacting to a situation with all our senses and emotions. And while we act, the situation changes and my emotion change and so on. And that's certainly true for cooking, to use just one example, because we want to discuss a bit more, right? When you cook, actually you can say, when someone cooks in the old way, you could say, oh, it was you or it was you, because you cook differently. But you can even say, oh, she was in a bad mood or she was in love or so. In Germany, we say, if you're in love, it's too salty, right? So action and emotion and situation are permanently intertwined, and now we follow the logic of the Thermomix, of the algorithms, even with Lego bricks. So the connection between emotion and action is cut. And that doesn't, but of course we are still affective beings, right? So the affection is kind of saved for the news tonight, and then I would really like to kill Trump or Putin or whoever it is, right? So I think it's very interesting to think along these lines of what's going on with the emotions. Sorry for being too long.
Yeah, no,
may I
go
ask
for it,
another question about emotion, because you just spoke about young people, and in France, young people, they have an expression, so it's not in French, but it's la FOMO, j'ai la FOMO, la FOMO, the fear of missing out. And when I was reading your book, you said that, you wrote that because we don't have any more belief in eternal life, we want to fill our lives with lots and lots of things. And I was thinking about la FOMO, fear of missing out. And now there's another word, another expression, which is la JOMO, joy of missing out. So the joy to stay at home in your sofa with your cat, with your tea, and not going out. So
yeah, I think, but I think we could agree that if it was the joy of missing out, that's actually something I suggested in the acceleration book, right? Yeah, we should realize that life is getting good if we miss out of things. But I'm afraid that when I look at the empirical mental health data, it's not joy of missing out, it's fatigue, right? It's a kind of it's the realization it's in vain anyway. Whether I go to the party, I won't have fun, or whether I stay at home, I won't have fun either. So it's not the joy of missing out, it's the kind of the graying out of the world. So something needs to change.
Maybe the joy of projection, right? So to see a future. Maybe I'll pass the mic to Lucas.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Well, it's. I would like to have. I have a question for, in fact, both of you. Well, you both follow my research now in Kinshasa, and when I was listening to you this afternoon, Hartmut, when you were meeting the students, I was again struck by how resonance is presented not as harmony or comfort, but as a way of remaining in relation with the world that resists us, and a world we cannot fully control or even stabilize. And but that resonates strongly for me. Here is Olivier Hamant's work on living systems, and where robustness does not emerge from optimization or coherence, but from accepting instability and redundancy and limits. In biology, as much as in society, life seems to persist not because it masters its environment, but because it learns how to stay present within uncertainty. And so my question to both of you would be this: could resonance and robustness be understood as complementary ways of inhabiting a world where crisis is no longer an exception, but a permanent condition, not as solutions, but as orientations for how to live, act, and take responsibility within constraints. And yeah, this is what the reality that I meet in Kinshasa, also in Gaza, but not through my research, but through having been there a lot. And so
I'll just say a few words because Hartmut is the star today. So, but maybe I can say one thing. You said accepting instability. I would say if you think of living systems, I would say they welcome instabilities, because acceptability is a defeat, right? When you accept something, means that it's a constraint that you have to carry, right? When you welcome, it's actually it's like take a musician example. It's like a jazzman or a jazzwoman doing an improv. They are welcoming instability, right? Because instability is where you have more room, more ideas, errors are feeding the intention, and so you really play with the instability. And so this, I mean, it's one way to look at robustness is to be in a situation where fluctuations are welcome. And that's definitely, to relate to Hartmut's work, definitely a world where control comes second. It's definitely not the primacy to control. And so this is where, I mean, to go back to your question, to me there is a strong link to, I mean, we talked about it as well, so there is a strong link between resonance and robustness, in some ways, you could put performance, optimization, efficiency in the category of acceleration. So when you accelerate...
Dynamic stabilization, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And on the other side, robustness resonates with resonance in some ways. Because when you want to vibrate with the world, when you want to have these interactions, you need more time. But you don't put slowness first, you just need to interact with your world, and the output of this is that you go slowly. You don't want to go slow, you just want to interact, and to interact you need to go slower. So maybe this is where, I mean, it's one of the elements of the interaction, but
yeah, I completely agree with that, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of connections, as you say, between both, on both sides. And your question is very interesting, but as you said, we discussed it also with these young musicians in Kinshasa, and there it does make sense to me in the way you presented that they found a way to deal with the uncertainty of and the instability of life. But in my own theory, I would say there's a kind of limit of it. I do distinguish between two different forms of, you could say, instability or uncertainty, right? One is where I don't have control over the environment, let's say, right? But I have a sense of what I call self-efficacy, auto-efficacité, I believe, right? And you can see, for example, we discussed earlier, for example, let's say skiing, for example, right? It's just, I grew up in the mountains in the snow, so I ski, right? So I would say, you know, the fun of skiing, the pleasure is that I don't completely control it. I might fall down, right, or so, right? But I nevertheless feel I can somehow come to master the slope, right? Go it down. If the slope is if the slope is so the opposite of steep, I forget, so flat, that I will certainly master it. It's not resonant, it's boring, right? So I have to have the thrill, you could say, right? It has to have some form of instability, uncontrollability, right? But if I can ski and I have to go down the slope, then it's simply horror, right? I mean, that I call it monstrous uncontrollability. And I have the feeling that we might actually move into a world, and that's at least how the world presents itself to some young people. And it seems to me in Kinshasa, we might sometimes border this, right? Where you have monstrous uncontrollability, where you lose the sense, that's what I mean with trust in life, right? I really think you have to, there are two forms of trust in life. It's a psychological concept with Bandura, and I think he thinks that trust means I trust that I have complete control over the environment, and this is not, you will never have complete control over your life, right? But the other sense of trust, which I think we need, is I don't know what will come. I might get through bad times, but I believe that I will find an answer. I will deal with it. I can somehow survive it, you could say, right? But if you have to say, I have no idea, I could be dead tomorrow, then it turns into monstrous instability. So what I want to say, right, is that not all forms of instability can be a source or an environment in which we thrive and resonate.
So actually, this goes to maybe one question I want to ask, but don't hesitate to, if you want to contribute as well. You often say that given the situation that we are in, the late modernity failure in some ways, we are not going to fix this with an extra component or an extra solution, right? It's the entire system, the entire structure of the system that needs to be revised, and this goes through a cultural transformation. So it's the biggest transformation that you can imagine. It's not a technical, it's not a social, it's not an economic transformation, it's a cultural transformation. And what you do in your research is to play with words, right? It's semantics, right? I mean, in some ways, right? I mean, there's some key words, right? And so I guess my question is, do you feel that that's, I mean, I guess it's a start, vocabulary, so some words. But now, what is the sentence? How do you articulate all this?
Oh, that's a tricky question. I mean, my students would hate it. I mean, they sometimes accuse me exactly of what you said, right? They say, you cannot change the world semantically, right? We have to change it economically and structurally and not semantically by simply inventing new words. And of course I understand what they mean, right? But nevertheless, I do think, I mean, I really follow, this is what I took from Charles Taylor, but also from Hubert Dreyfus and others, right? Human beings are self-interpreting animals, right? That means the world we live in is co-constructed by structures, by technologies, but also by words, you could say, by our interpretations, by the meanings of them. And as you said, I totally agree, we need a transformation at the most profound level we can get at, right? At the level of our existence. We discussed that earlier with the students. That was always the idea of the Frankfurt School, right? And of the Frankfurt School tradition. Critical theory, something is wrong with the modern mode of being in the world and to the world. And concepts are part of this, right? I mean, you cannot say what a social practice is without having the adequate words to describe it, right? If you don't have the practice, you cannot have the words, and the other way around, right? So I think words can be one place where we start to reflect, to become conscious also of the contingency of practices, right? So I think, yes, we need a new language, right? I think I really hope that, for example, resonance could do something, right, to give us a different sense of how a different way of being in the world could be possible. And that's why I'm also looking even linguistically when you mention words. You know, normally in our languages, Derrida was good at this, we have either the active mode or the passive mode, right? I throw or I am thrown, right? But there is a different way of thinking, even actions, right, which is called medio-passive. It's medio-passive. It's in between. I'm neither simply the subject of an activity, nor am I simply the object. I'm participating in it, right? So we have this saying, actually, if you say it snows, it snows. Is that active or passive? I mean, who is snowing whom, right? I mean, it's kind of, it doesn't work. I mean, even if you think of something like listening to music, I listen to music, it sounds active. But is it really active? I mean, just as much as passive. You hear it, you can hardly refuse it. In English, we can distinguish between listening, which is active, and hearing, which is rather passive. But I think we need to invent new languages of being in this world together. So I think, yes, words and language is important to achieve the transformation, to at least become capable of thinking a transformation.
I would like to also react to to what both of you say, and I think that when we think of how the world can be different, or looked at different, or treated differently, or lived in differently, we can learn a lot from people who are living in extreme conditions, constraints, like the research I'm doing in Kinshasa, but also the contact I have with musicians in Gaza, who throughout the war have been in the streets of Gaza, playing for children, teaching children, that you can have difficulties imagining that something like this can be happening. And they are, I don't know whether they would say in Gaza or even in Kinshasa also that they welcome this. Well, there's maybe I understand that the word welcoming can be seen as in different ways of, so like adopting or accepting. Well, these are not all not the right words, but that they are conscious of that they're living in a reality which they themselves cannot change, and so that they adopt it, welcome it, and see what can I do within that reality. One of the sentences that comes back enormously, and in Kinshasa and in Gaza, well, less in Gaza the last 2 years, but is "c'est normal." When I ask something, well, how do you manage in Kinshasa, and the answer is often "c'est normal." It's normal, and it's a way of saying, well, this is our normality, it's our reality, let's say. We don't necessarily want this to be normal, but it's our reality. And I think we can learn a lot from these people.
Well, maybe I can add on this. I mean, there's a classic example now in La Paz. You know, the day zero in La Paz, where there was no water in 2016. The center of the city, there was no big problem because you could buy water. But in the suburbs, where there are poor people, they couldn't buy water. But they didn't have any issues because their normality was not to have water on a regular basis. So they had developed commons of water, rotation systems and everything. So when it was day zero in La Paz, they didn't see it. So at least we can learn indeed from the south. I mean, at least from regions where the fluctuation. And just to say, I agree completely. Welcoming, it's the ideal scenario. So I would say we would want to be in situations where the fluctuations are welcomed, but maybe creating the conditions in which this happens. Christine, do you want to add something?
It's difficult to speak after Kinshasa and Gaza and La Paz, but it was about what you said about the importance of the words. And in resonance, you make a difference between joy and amusement. Yeah. And I would like if you can explain, because to say that and to show that your book are not so pessimistic. So read the books, because it's not only about acceleration, alienation. It's there are hope and joy. So could you explain this difference between joy and amusement, and with a weak evaluation and a strong evaluation, if you don't mind?
Exactly. Yeah, thanks. I'm grateful for this because sometimes I sound like everything is totally hopeless anyway, right? Yeah, and this is, I mean, this is something I get in disagreements with my students too, because I really think as human beings, and we discussed this earlier, as maybe as living beings, right? We have this propensity, this capacity for getting into resonance, even under the worst contexts. I mean, of course, Gaza is, I mean, there might be a kind of point of where it gets almost impossible, but I found this really, you know, actually it has made me change my mind, because in the resonance book, I still say, we need a kind of positive conditions, helpful conditions to get into resonance, right? That's why I would say, if you, for example, if you are in pain or so, it's unlikely you get in resonance, or if you are in disagreement or in whatever. So I said there are temporal conditions. When you're pressed for time, you will not get in resonance, and spatial conditions and so on. But then, actually, people told me about Ukraine war, for example. I had a doctoral student. I keep talking about this because it really struck me. And he said he was just in Ukraine, and they were really in dire times because there was bombardments, even in Kiev, right? But he feels it very strange. They were sitting, students and also teachers, and they were discussing philosophy, and his feeling was that's much more resonant than what he knew from Western Europe, right? And he said, even it seems to him, I mean, we have to be careful with this, right? But he says, it feels to him that even poetry has gained new significance, right? And I can understand that, right? Reading a poem about maybe death and life or so, when you don't know whether your father or your brother or your son will come back, it might gain new significance, right? So he said really that his feeling was, that was the group feeling, that even philosophy, music, art, and other things have gained in kind of new resonance, almost deeper resonance, right? So now I think it's quite obvious in ruins, if there is a single violin in the ruins, right, or a single smile, or a single flower, it might be much more resonant than in bad circumstances. But my claim is that as human beings, we have this capacity, this sense, which almost can never be, I hope, completely destroyed. And you know, the students I have, which are completely in the Marx or in the Adorno tradition, they say, no, everything about my feelings is capitalistically distorted. So resonance is a neoliberal concept. Actually, I tried that once myself. I was in a debate. I had to argue against resonance theory, and I made exactly this argument. Resonance is a neoliberal idea. Be resonant while you work, be resonant while you consume, and that, of course, would be bad, right? But I do think we have this capacity, right? And therefore, I think there is hope as long as there are human beings. What even, you know, if I'm totally pressed and I'm depressed and whatever, and then there is this single violin or this smile or this word, right? And all of a sudden there is resonance, so that there is hope until the end, I would say. But you asked about the difference. Yeah, I mean, there I really draw on Charles Taylor, but I also draw on my experience, right? Because I mean, it's not that I'm not a Puritan at all. I can play computer games for hours sometimes, and particularly the most stupid computer games, like Doodle Jump or so. And I was always, you might know it, it's a really simple, stupid thing, but I can play it for 4 hours. And I thought, so why do I do it? And what's wrong with it? Because it did feel a bit wrong. And I thought, it's not a cultural prejudice that Doodle Jump is not productive. It's that I really don't really feel fulfilled, right? And I thought, so my difference is this, right? Charles Taylor distinguishes between strong and weak evaluations. And it has nothing to do with the strength of a desire, right? A weak evaluation is something I want to have. If I'm really thirsty now, or an alcoholic, I really would love a beer now. That would be the thing I would love most, right? But the value is that I want to have it. I crave for it, right? While in strong evaluations, the source of the value is not me. I think this thing is really valuable, right? Like, for example, I really want to listen to Iron Maiden or Metallica or Pink Floyd, which I love. I've written on heavy metal, right? But I might feel that Beethoven is really valuable. It should be preserved. Actually, I can't stand listening to him. Okay, I can actually. I love it. but you could say, that strong evaluation. I think there is something valuable in this thing, even if I don't like it. That's a strong evaluation. And my claim was, amusement is when a weak desire or evaluation is fulfilled, right? I can play doodle jump and I love it, but I don't think doodle jump is really something that should be preserved, right? So amusement is if I do something I love. But joy is if I do something I love and it's connected to a sense of strong evaluation and it's really valuable in itself. So that leads to a different form of connection. And I think this distinction is quite useful, not as a moral culturalist or so undertone, but as a kind of analysis of our emotions.
Maybe surfing on this question, since we are in a school year with students, how do you, what would be the conditions to create this sense of hope, of joy, and like with the students, right? As a professor, as a school, it's a difficult question. How do you, and I'm going to make it even more difficult in an era of AI.
It's already difficult enough without the AI. Okay, I have to, let's block out the AI, because the other thing is, I really tried quite hard, because I always said, if I can't if I don't go into science, I'll become a teacher, right? I do have the teacher education, and every summer I run a kind of summer camp for talented high school kids, right? I do this forever, and it's the 2 weeks I love most in my life, right? So I would really say it's possible, apparently, but of course it's very favorable conditions. It's not easily to transport into normal regular schools, right? But it's 2.5 weeks where students really, I would really say, they discover it's almost an explosion of resonance, I would say, because of course they realize there are others who like to do the same, and then someone says, let's play theater, and you see them really say, let's try it out, let's simply do it. There's no performance pressure, right? There are no grades. There's nothing to gain. It's the pure joy. It's the joy of doing something together, right? I mean, they do take courses and they do play music or so, but it's really, it's no external pressure, which helps, of course. It's favorable conditions. I wouldn't deny this, but you can really see, and it's amazing what's possible there. So they would, at least it doesn't always work in exactly the same sense, but sometimes they would come up with every evening at midnight. Sometimes they go until 2 or 3, right, of course. And they would sit together and also discuss political things. And at the end they would say, it was so amazing. Finally, I realized that political discussions can make sense, right? It's not just who shouts loudest or something like this. And one of the conditions, it's really interesting. I think one thing is really true. I mean, I totally believe in my new book. I feel like a rock musician who always says, my new album is the best album, right? So buy it. But I think this, this difference between simply fulfilling, we're executing a program, and really being an agent, that is so important. So you have to give them and yourself the idea of let's be agents together. And in order for this to happen, there really needs to be trust in the system. Because we always tell this, it's a group of 100 students, which I've never seen before, and I won't see afterwards, so it's easy to abuse. But I always tell them, or the teachers tell them, we cannot control you, right? We open up all our rooms, all our equipments, even our cash for you, right? We sell commodities, small biscuits and we tell them, we believe that you pay the amount because otherwise we will be in trouble. So it's always a little risk, but now I don't find it risky at all, because at the end of these 2 weeks, it's amazing. They always write, we were totally amazed in how much trust you put in us. But more important was that we did not abuse it. We did not misuse it. Of course, it's favorable conditions. I don't want to deny it. But there you can see it is possible to create spaces like this. And I really think we should try. But only, right now we install a system of complete mistrust. Let's make it safe that there is surveillance and all these things. And if someone does wrong, he should be sent off. This is the way it won't work.
I like the idea. A few years back, we organized an Anthropocene school here at ENS, and this was exactly the idea, like to have a space of non-control, basically. And indeed, things emerge. Lucas, do you want to say something? Maybe I haven't.
You looked like it.
It's okay. Yeah, I wonder. So, but I see the time. So, maybe one question that something we discussed with Stefan Grombach, who is somewhere in the room. The question of geopolitics. Maybe it's to open. I'm trying to do a spectrum.
It always
of
gets me in
subjects,
trouble.
But in geopolitics, so what's your take? I mean, we are all impacted with what's happening with the news, and how do you articulate this idea of acceleration, alienation, resonance, social energy, constellation, and situation? How do you articulate all this with what we are contemplating now? And do you see a way forward? I mean, it's something that we sort of discussed, but
yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, the one thing. I mean, right now it's very hard. I shouldn't speak about it now. I fall pessimistic again. But I have an idea to say something. Right now, it feels to me, I must say, something has changed even in my thinking. I turned kind of more pessimistic, but now in the end I'm still optimistic. You know, some of my books sound pessimistic, but I always wrote, even the acceleration book ends on a very bleak note. But I wrote it with a conviction that we can do better than that. We can do something about it. Let's do it, and we'll find a way forward. I always said, you know, modernity was the promise that that there should be no king to tell us how to live, and no church, and not even nature or so we can create this world, right? And now we should be unable to do something against the institutional roots or fabrics which we created ourselves. That's very unlikely, so let's do it. But you know, with the double crisis of COVID and the Ukraine war, you know, it wasn't the Ukraine war, but at least at that time I thought, okay, now we are back to war and the plague. That means for 6,000 years we haven't learned anything. But in addition to this, now we have the environmental disaster and the nuclear threats. And so it's now proven we human beings are too stupid for this, right? We simply can't do it. Let's face it. I mean, that's all there is to be said. I mean, I was really frustrated and thought, that's it. I mean, it's not. And then I thought, well, what's the problem with war? No, what's the problem with war? That's obvious. I'm pacifist. I still am. I think it's wrong what we're doing. I can get totally passionate about it. It's so stupid. I mean, how stupid can we be to really want to get ready for war? All over Europe, we're speaking about war. The future is war. We are living in pre-war times. How stupid can we be? I mean, we will never save the world on this route. Now I forgot what I really wanted to say.
It's the power of war.
I didn't want to talk about war, the problem was, I think this is really important. When, you know, the German Bundeskanzler said, Olaf Scholz, there is a turning of the tides, Zeitenwende. It's a new time, a new era. And I thought, Mr. Scholz, that's not right. I mean, we had war in Afghanistan for 20 years. And what exactly did we do in Iraq? And even in Yugoslavia, it was Europe where we had war. But the huge difference was that with all of these wars, we thought, unfortunately, there is still war. But we have to find a better system, strengthen the UN, strengthen the EU, create a peaceful world. And what has changed in 2022 was that we have given up on this dream, particularly in Europe. Actually, the rest of the world is kind of laughing at us, rightly so, right? But Europe said, okay, that was a crazy dream, let's forget about it, let's go to war. And I think that's stupid, right? We will not do this. So my strongest conviction is we have to go back to this sense of creating the world together, being in this world together. We share this one world, it's so obvious. And the climate crisis cannot be solved if we struggle against each other, China against Russia, and or against the US and against Europe. And it's certainly true with all the other problems too. The AI world, right? I mean, AI is a huge, it's not just a threat, it's also a chance, but it's something we are in it together. If we use AI to improve the war capacity against each other, we are completely lost. So I think, I got totally pessimistic, and I thought, okay, everywhere I listen to, they speak about going into confrontation. We have to find China, we have to find Russia, forget about it. But now I think, okay, maybe we need one more deep crisis, and then we go beyond it. But my more optimistic note is, and this is where we maybe can end if we need to end, I really thought in human civilization, I mean, there are certainly experts who know better than I know, we could never foresee the turns, right, that would come from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age to the Industrial Age. We never knew what would come. There was always crisis coming, right, and probably people thought, oh, this is the end, right, we will never find out. So I think maybe it's really just the beginning of if it could really well be. I mean, I can't see it, so I can't tell you where I think we'll go, and it would be great. But the fact that I can't see around the corner doesn't mean there isn't a corner. And if it's true that we are resonant human beings, then we will find the corner and turn around and everything will be great.
There you go. That's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so this is your chance to ask a question to Hartmut Rosa. So anyone, is there a mic circulating? Actually, I don't know. I can give my mic, actually. Questions, okay.
Thank you very much, Hartmut. Very honored to witness this moment. I've been very inspired by your thinking, especially in my field of work, which is leadership. And I sometimes have this moral dilemma that you kind of alluded to, which is, are we using resonance as a new tool in service of capitalism, of making people happy and productive? So what do you answer to this?
Yeah, I think that is it's as you say, right? I mean, it's not just that it's a potentiality of the term. People are trying to do it. I mean, there are even companies and you know, companies who want to send their crew to a resonance weekend and so on, right? This is very clear. So it's a possibility, but my claim is it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. It doesn't work on both ends. I mean, because I think capitalism lives on the promise of resonance, right? It sells us promises of resonance as commodities, right? I mean, that's exactly the trick how capitalism works, right? We yearn for resonance, but the resonance is uncontrollable. So the yearning for resonance is transformed into a yearning for a commodity. Like, for example, take this cruise and you get a polar light guarantee, right? You will see the polar lights or you get your money back. So the polar lights are transferred into a commodity and it works. But whether you experience resonance or not when you see the polar lights, this they cannot guarantee, right? So maybe you see the polar lights and it doesn't mean anything to you because you're in an argument with your partner or so, right? Or you have a headache or whatever, right? So, and the thing is, the more the commodities make the world controllable, and exactly by this, they don't deliver. But it's also interesting in the productive side. I mean, you know, my favorite example I give, and this, but I think I've heard it in France, right? Of a company which is a quite high-end company. They sent their crew, the team, the leading team, as you say, for a kind of resonance weekend. They didn't call it that at that time, but it clearly was the idea. We have to get people to really put in their subjectivities, as it was called at that time, right? To get in touch with each other, to find the meaning of their lives in their work in order to make them more productive. So they were sent away to the mountains for a weekend and they really got into resonance. They really realized each other as human beings and they talked about the meaning of their work and their lives. And when they came back to the office on Monday, they all quit their jobs. They said, this is not how we find the good life, right? So my claim really is resonance has this excess moment, right? If you try to commodify or make it into a productive tool, you lose it. Either you don't get resonance, or if you get it, it has an explosive tendency. So let them do it.
Hi, I have a question regarding your work. When you started your work, you found a lot of success in France, and I was surprised. So, to your mind, what make French culture more receptive to your work in the beginning? And how can we use this specificity of French culture maybe to change the mindsets and the cultures?
Yeah, actually, I thought a lot about it. I think there is something between my way of thinking and the French way of thinking, right? I mean, I think France has really always been sensitive with temporal issues, right? Marcel Proust, or actually, as I said, La Recherche du Temps Perdu, but also with Baudrillard, for example, right, with the year 2000 and other writings. But Paul Virilio clearly was, I think he was the first. He wanted to write about this tromocratie, right, the ruling of the speed and temporality. So I think French culture had very early on in the writings, in literature, in maybe even in the style of life, had a sense for this connection between temporality and being, right? Between being and time, and also their form of. I mean, actually, I got it probably through Charles Taylor, what I talked about, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, right? Having this interest in phenomenology, right? In the way of kind of exploring also in the movies, right, or in music, but certainly in the writings and in philosophy, the different modes of being, of experiencing the world. In the literature, I think it's very clear with Mallarmé and all the others, Camus, of course, Sartre, and they were all exploring what is it to be alienated from the world, right? I forgot what it's in French or English, but all of these things. So I think, different cultures have different sensibilities, and this sensibility for senses of alienation and resonance and the sense of temporality seems to be very well developed in French culture, I'd say.
Well, I would like to ask a question. I will take advantage of holding the microphone. Well, you're talking about resonance. I wanted to ask if meditation for you could be a tool to enhance personal resonance with the world, because when we meditate, we concentrate on breath, we contemplate the moment, we try to focus on one thing. And I guess in accelerated world, well, I experience this myself, I exist often either in the future or in the past, and rarely in the moment. And I remember a professor back then times during student years just gave me a piece of advice to concentrate on when I brush my teeth, just to think about brushing my teeth, not about what I'm going to do during the day. So what do you think about it as a tool?
Yeah, yeah, I'm quite ambivalent about it. I'm deeply ambivalent about it. I mean, in the long run, I would say, in the end, I think I'm more positive than negative about it. But I had once a doctoral student, and he really wrote his dissertation about exactly this question, right? The question was, is meditation or mindfulness, which is the kind of the buzzword for this, is it subversive, right? Does it have the capacity to transform our society, our mode of being, or is it affirmative? Because you just used the word of tool, so the question is tool for what, right? And I think it has both capacities. It can be a tool to survive alienated and accelerating society, right? And I mean, maybe there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, right? I mean, so actually, I practice it myself sometimes, right? I did grow up more or less in a Hinduistic sect, right? So meditation was something very well known to me, and I would say yes, we can use it as a tool. If you feel totally stressed, close to burnout, it can help, right? But I think it can also help to rediscover a different mode of being in the world and then really change our life. I would really say the whole mindfulness movement was kind of, it's driven by this yearning for there must be a different way of being with myself, my breath and my body, right? Being with my surrounding, being with my fellow human beings. What we call solidarity, sustainability, mindfulness is the idea of an idea of a resonant world. I would really say so. I mean, the problem I have as a sociologist with it is that, I mean, that's, I wrote about it in at least in German. I don't think it has been translated. The problem is that the mindfulness movement places it all on the subject. If only you are mindful enough, your life will be good life, right? While resonance theory really says resonance is not something I can have. I am resonant doesn't make any sense. I'm resonant with something, right? So it has at least two sides, but whether there's resonance in the world depends on the institutional context. And for me, a lot of the mindfulness movement forgets about this, right? It says it's only you. If you are mindful, then everything is fine. And the other problem is, so I called it a kind of subjective reductionism, but then there's a kind of, on the other side, there's a kind of over expansion, so to speak. You have to be mindful towards everything and everyone. And I don't think we can be resonant all the time everywhere, right? It's the excess of resonance are rather momentary and singular, right? So at least I would say the problem which can be with meditation is that it forgets about the institutional settings, the sociological structures of our societies, which also have to be taken in mind. But it can be a tool towards rediscovering moments and experiences of resonance. I said yes and no.
Here.
Thank you. I'm just a student, so I'm not directly familiar with your work, but your conference was fascinating.
Excuse me, who is speaking?
Here.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Sorry. So I've got two questions. Those might be things that you've already addressed in your work, in which case, sorry. But the concept of resonance does make me think a lot about rhythm analysis by Henri Lefebvre. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. And if you are, do you believe that rhythm analysis can be...
What is the term?
Rhythm analysis by French philosopher Henri Lefebvre.
Yeah.
But even if you're not, how can we, as social scientists, identify and measure and study resonance? What can be the methods and tools that we can use in our research?
The tools and the tools in our research to kind of study what kind of rhythms and structures it needs to have a kind of resonance society or institution?
How can we identify resonance between people and
okay,
things?
how can we measure it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there I'm quite optimistic, I must say. I mean, that's something some of my students hate too. But I love to teach, right, and to argue with students back and forth, right. But I think we can measure resonance between human beings. Look. Let's say it's just the two of them, Lukas and me, who are arguing. I always make this example, right. And so we have a conversation. Let's say it's going on for an hour or so, and then at the end I would say it was such a resonant talk. Thank you a lot, Lukas. And Lukas thinks it was so unresonant, right? Rosa never listened. He simply said what he always said, right? He never, and I think you could judge who of us is right. It's not just subjective kind of judgment, right? You could really see, was it listening and answer? Because for me, resonance has 4 elements. Being touched by the other. So that means I really have to listen what you say, right? And it has to leave an impression. But also a feeling self-efficacy, which means my arguments also have to impress on you. And then transformation. And then you could really see in the conversation, oh, they both changed their points of view, right? So clearly you can see resonance is not a subjective feeling, oh, it was resonant, right? Or so, or it was awful. It has to have these elements. It has the 4 elements. Both were touched by the arguments of the other. Both were kind of touching with their own arguments the other. There was a transformation in the conversation, and it was unpredictable where it will end. You know, it wasn't just, okay, now he makes this argument. If you as a spectator could say, oh, now Lukas will answer this and Rosa will now say this, then it's certainly not resonance, right? Resonance is kind of bringing, it's the uncontrollable, what you could not predict and foresee. So I think that's a quite easy way to judge it. But more than that, I really think as physical beings, resonance has a physical component, right? For example, when I'm touched by music, sometimes I have tears in my eyes, and of course you can measure this, right? And you can actually measure, they do this in empirical aesthetics, and maybe you know as an expert in emotions, right? There is skin resistance, there is blood pressure and heart rate, there can be entrainment between people. So I would really say, and even there is a neuronal reaction. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, and then my students say, oh no, Rosa, you're going the wrong way, because then you make resonance controllable. And I say, no, measurable is not controllable. If there is resonance, you can see it, but you cannot provoke it, right? Not by noise and not by a good argument. If I don't want, or if I'm incapable of resonance, you won't see it. But I'm quite optimistic that this will work.
Hello. I'd like to understand if some group of people in the world, some culture, are more able to experiment resonance. And I am thinking especially about native people, for example. And I am interested also in the fact that maybe native people, they are more aware of environmental constraints since a long time. So I'd like to have your view of it.
Yeah, I mean, my immediate response would be, because this is an important question, I think, right? And I feel it is important, and I'm very much inclined to say yes, right? I think there are very different sensibilities and sensitivities of being in the world and with the world. So I would say probably all cultures, that at least that was the idea I had. And we tried to have some kind of empirical research, even historical research at the Max Weber Kolleg, which I'm directing. It's also interdisciplinary, maybe our institutions could cooperate, right? And my idea was that the axis of resonance, what you're in resonance with, is different between different forms of life, right? Different in native or indigenous people or modern societies. But there's always a certain sensibility and sensitivity. And with a lot of indigenous or native people, there is a very different form, different axis of resonance with elements in nature. Could be rivers, could be trees, could be animals, for example. But there's almost always also a sense of resonance with the ancestors, right? With those coming before us and those coming after us, which actually, it's actually another thing with the but let's forget about mindfulness at this point, right? So it's a different, even temporal resonance is different. And I think we lost what Charles Taylor now calls cosmic connections. He says it's kind of a sense of vertical connection, right? Of sharing a world, sharing even the cosmos, right? So I think, yes, we can learn a lot, because modernity is about this kind of instrumental control over the world. We are very good at that, right? So I would say, yes, certainly, probably we need to rediscover other forms of resonance, to rediscover our sense of resonance. But on the other hand, I would say we have to be careful about not romanticizing, right? I mean, because there we also find sometimes very cruelties, right, between people, or between also even to animals or other things. So I would think all forms of life probably have particular sensitivities and particular insensitivities towards other realms of life. And modernity does have something to offer, I would say, because, for example, the idea that love should be a relationship of resonance, right, of equality, but also parent-child relations as resonant relations, but also actually resonance with nature, resonance with art, resonance with religion. So I would say even modernity has a strong sense, a strong axis of resonance too. My hope would really be to somehow connect and combine them to overcome our present predicament.
Thank you very much. Very stimulating discussion. I have one question. What do you think about, can we find paradoxically resonance in acceleration as well? So if we might look at people, for example, I do research on people who are very busy in their professions, like consultants, lawyers, and so on. And one thing I hear from them is that when the Christmas holidays are approaching, they often say that I hate going on holiday. So I'm wondering how you see the connection between acceleration and seeing resonance or experiencing resonance in this very busy life as well. Thank you.
I mean, that's a tricky question. I mean, if it wasn't for the hate part, I would have given a different answer. No, I mean, I would really say, I mean, this is why I didn't want to be the guru of slowness, right? I mean, I don't say that slowness will necessarily create resonance, nor would I say that speed is always creating alienation. I mean, I always made this example. If you ride a roller coaster, right? Of course, the resonance comes through speed and not through the absence of it. And even if you like heavy metal, which I do, right? It's a kind of high energy, and actually metal got much faster than hard rock, for example, before, right? So I would really say, of course, resonance, it's kind of, it's not necessarily against speed. I mean, my claim was, if I have to change my context, look, time pressure can clearly kill resonance, right? I think now almost famous reply is always, if you go to the airport, You cannot get in resonance with anyone, right? You might come up with the greatest idea I've ever heard. I have to say, yeah, but not right now, I missed the train, right? And there might be a cat strolling at my feet, I cannot go for it. And there might be a spectacular sunset, I have to ignore everything, otherwise I'll miss the train, my plane, or the train. And my claim is, basically we're always on our way to the airport, right? Unfortunately, I cannot really get into resonance. But that doesn't mean that that speed is always killing resonance. There was this one, isn't it? I think it's Mallarmé too, une passante, where he describes that it's just a glance in the street. Oh, Baudelaire. It's Baudelaire. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's Baudelaire. So it's just a glance in the street which creates resonance. So it can be fast, right? And of course, people who really love their work, they are in resonance with their work, right? But there seems to be a moment where it can become addictive, right? If you can never let it go, if the threat of Christmas, you feel it's a kind of, I hate it so much, then it seems to me, then it's probably no longer resonance, it's a kind of an addiction, I would at least say. And I think there's this huge danger if you only have this one axis of resonance, right? And you block out everything else, and then something in your life cuts into this axis, then you're in depression, right? So if someone says this, I love my work so much, I hate the holidays, I think probably something's wrong, and it has to do with the rhythm, with the rhythmic nature of human beings, right? I mean, this, I think, when we speak about time, this is so important. The difference between temporalities. Sunday is different from the profane days. Of course, it could be Saturday if you're if you're Jew, or Friday if you're I hope I get it right. Yes, if you're a Muslim or so. But that every day is like every other day, right? And it's your own decision. That's not good for us as a culture and not good for us as human beings, right? So I think different temporalities are essential for staying resonant.
Yes, thank you very much for your talk and the way you talk, so vivid. When you speak, I must always think of this book of Erich Fromm, To Have or To Be. It's the difference between modes of being. You always speak of modes of being, between having, possessing, consuming, and being, and loving. Love is an important word as well. And when you talk about resonance, I'm sorry, I haven't read your second book. There's something, when you give examples, there's always isolated examples. I mean, of things that you do in your private life. You go with friends on weekends, you do extra 2 weeks with your students, and you are in the forest, and you are with a tree. Of course, we do it in our private lives. We can find this resonance. How can we do it in our work? When you have emails, when you have computers, when the only way to communicate with your colleagues is email, or when you talk, you have PowerPoint presentations, people talk about, numbers matter. But the look, the way you keep in touch with somebody, the way you look, the way you listen to the voice, you had a very nice, when you say contact, not only the view, not only seeing is important, but also the voice, the touching. So how can you resist? How can you do, because you have structural acceleration, and we are individuals, swimming against the storm. How can you do it together? You say together, okay, I want to do it with other people. How?
Yeah, no, but yeah, it's a big question, but it's important, and I hope I have something to say there, right? Because I think there are two moments, right? One was work, and the other was together, right? and I think that for me those are two axes of resonance which I discuss in the book, right? And because it's really, really, really important for me, you know. When I wrote the book, I was totally in favor. I have a whole chapter on unconditional basic income. and I think I've become a little more hesitant on this because I think work is such a strong axis of resonance for human beings still, even under neoliberal conditions, right? Because of course, email, I hate email, right? Yeah. But what I do and what you do, right? I mean, being kind of teachers and researchers, I would say, there I clearly, and I think it's still possible. I like to quote Leonard Cohen anthem there is a crack in everything. And that's how the light gets in. And I must really say, when I teach my students, there is resonance in the classroom. At least it's possible. Sometimes it doesn't appear, right? But there are moments where we really start to think and reflect. And you see the other's eye, and you see, now something is happening. And it's the same when I do research, as I understand it, when I wrote my last book. Like the rock star, my nose book is the best, right? No, but there really, I told you, there were moments of pure joy. Even when I wrote the Alienation book, I thought, well, the only time I don't feel alienated is when I write about alienation, right? So what I want to say is, even in this work, right? And now the interesting thing is, you could say, oh yeah, we the academics, we still have some time. I mean, I totally share what you say. Writing applications, writing reviews, all of this is totally alienating. I really thought sometimes this is why I reinvented took back to the concept of alienation. It's alienating, but there are small pockets of resonance. But my claim is really, let's start with these pockets and make them systematically bigger, right? Claim that you want to teach in the classroom, that you want to have resonance. Claim that you want to write what you find important and not what you get money for or higher rankings. I mean, I think it's possible, at least. I think, I want to have a revolution by starting at the cracks where the light comes in. I really believe, I believe it's possible, but I think it's not just with academic works. But if you talk, and my father was a baker, right? I mean, and I really think, when I watched him, even as a child, how he was baking, it was almost pure resonance. And that's how he talked about it. He said, you have to develop a feeling for the dough, right? You have to watch it, right? You have to feel it, you have to smell it. So it was self-efficacy. And he said it was uncontrollability. You never quite know how it will turn out when it comes out of the oven, right? But I could see it in his eyes. It was a kind of relationship of resonance. And then I thought, okay, that's only with bakers. But then watch someone working with wood, watch a gardener, watch someone working with children or in the care sectors, of course, but even a hairdresser. I mean, a hairdresser they are totally underpaid. I know, it's awful. But sometimes you see it when they see, the kind of dressing the hair. And then I realized, even for journalists writing an article and for people doing programs, in the writing computer programs, the computer program. So there can be resonance in work. And I think this is exactly what we need to rediscover and defend against these brutal forms of neoliberal exploitations. But it's the starting point. And when it comes to how do we do it together, there I've really written a lot. I mean, maybe it's not completely convincing, I agree with that. But democracy only works as a sphere of resonance, right? And what's the basic moment of resonance? Listening and responding. Listening to the other. Resonance is only possible with someone who thinks, feels, loves, speaks differently from yourself, right? So right now we have developed a political culture where we don't want to hear the others. Send them away or silence them. I mean, if you look to Germany, right, some say, abschieben, let's get rid of all the foreigners, everyone who is not German. But the others say, silence the Nazis, right? Kick out the Nazis. So that's exactly the opposite of a resonant society. Listening and speaking to each other, to those who are different from you, right? And you have to, I want to hear you and I want to be transformed by you. This gets me in trouble because then my students ask, oh, you want to be transformed by a Nazi? And of course, that's a problem, right? But I would say, yes, I want to hear the Nazi, what's really moving him or her, right? Why did you get there? Why do you think so? And maybe he has something. I run the risk that he might transform me in the end. But I would really say, if you want to ask, how can we act together? We have to rediscover democracy not as a battleground. There, I think, actually, French political theory I think it took a bit the wrong way with Chantal Mouffe and Laclau and Rancière and Badiou. They think politics is a battleground of the irreconcilable. I would really want to go with Hannah Arendt. I would say politics is not about fighting in the first place. Politics is about constructing the world we live in, right? And of course, in this process of construction, we have conflict. It's impossible to not have conflict. But rediscovering democracy as a sphere of resonance is what I hope for.
We will take the last question. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much for your very inspiring work. And thank you for having mentioned the mediopassive way of seeing the world, which was one of the ancient Greeks, the mediopassive dimension of
exactly,
the Greek language. And I wanted to ask you how in our secular age, to refer to the title of Charles Taylor's book, how do you include in this resonance the metaphysical dimension of the possible metaphysical dimension of the resonance?
Yeah, I don't quite know what you feel with metaphysical. Probably you don't mean the kind of the philosophical metaphysics, right? But this kind of the transcendence. Yeah, I mean, I have a chapter on everything, right? No, but I have a very strong belief. You know, I try to say we can think of resonance along 4 axes. One is resonance with human beings, right? To look into someone's eyes or see a face is a kind of, it's a potential for getting in resonance. The other is, since we are physical beings, material beings, we are in resonance with objects and materialities, what we discussed briefly with work, right? So there's a social axis and a material axis. And then I included even a self-axis of resonance, because this other we encounter can be within myself, right? A kind of psychic trait which I don't like or did not discover, can even be a disease or a memory of everything we know from psychoanalysis, right? But to your question, there's a 4th axis, which I think is existential for us as human being. We need a sense of how we are related, what with Jaspers we could call the ultimate reality, right? The encompassing reality. And sometimes people speak about this encompassing reality as life, right? I'm part of life. I feel life running through me or so, right? Or the cosmos, a connection with the universe. Sometimes I like watching the stars, right? And I think, of course, I can have a kind of simply scientific view of it, but sometimes when I watch through the telescope and I have a sense of what's kind of coming towards me, I feel connected, right? Or in the arts, when people close their eyes and listen to music, they feel a kind of existential moment. So I think so at the bottom of us as human beings is the question: what lies at the bottom of my existence, right? Is it the silence, the hostile universe, or is it an answering, a hearing, a listening, a welcoming other, right? And I think religion is really, for me, the core of religion is the idea, and even maybe the experience that someone has given you the breath of life, or has given me the breath of life, right? Someone has called me by your name. I have called you by your name. You are mine. All these metaphors are a sense of, at my deepest, at the encompassing reality, there is a connection. It's resonance, right? And then I asked as a sociologist, when I pray, do I turn inward or outward? And I realized both directions, right? It's exactly this sense, my innermost reality and the encompassing reality. It's exactly what Taylor writes about cosmic connection, right? It's a resonant relationship. But resonant means I cannot control it. I don't see the other side. I cannot have it, right? Maybe I misunderstand it, but I have this sense of being connected. And then I thought, yes, but there is this other sense. Let's face it. The world is silent and hostile. Camus, right? The birth of the absurd, right? Face it that at every corner of the world we realize the world is silent and hostile and non-understood, and everything else is a kind of phantasmagoria, right? So I thought, okay, I don't have the sociological or the philosophical means to decide who is right, but it feels much nicer. It feels much better if I think we are connected, so this must be right. But now I think both are right? We don't have the ultimate reality, right? But it's totally important for us as human beings to to keep both senses alive, right? And that means we have to have some sense of transcendental or transcendent connection. We can get it through experiences of nature or music or through religion. But if you forget about this sense of being in resonance in the vertical or the existential sense, then we are screwed as a civilization, right? So I think we need a sense of cosmic connection without denying there's also a sense of cosmic denial and cosmic silence, right? And somehow, actually you could say theology has for a long time tried to connect the two and face the two, right? So I would like to go this direction. Okay.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed this dialogue, which is a successful dialogue, right? Exchange.
Thanks to all of you. Thank you. Thank you.
And maybe just to connect one of the previous doctorate honoris causa, Denis Meadows. So when Denis Meadows came here in 2022, he was talking about the opposition between addiction and adaptability. And I think it resonates with acceleration and resonance. Thank you very much, and have a good night.
Thanks to you.